Implementing Communities. So, and I'm delighted to have such a great panel of experts to come and talk about that. So what we do with these sessions is we do a bit more show and tell, as well as taking your questions. It's the usual routine with office hours. If you have a question, please put it in chat first. That way we know what's coming up. But I know that also Sara and Kari and TJ have some things lined up that they can give you some, that they can show you as well, and talk a little bit about some projects that they've been working on. So we'll have some conversation as well as your questions. Because there are now a larger number of you on the call, please, if you're not speaking or presenting or answering a question, please could you mute your microphone? And then, as usual, I just wanted to remind everybody that none of us work for Salesforce.org. We are all volunteering our time and talents because we enjoy sharing what we know about Salesforce. That said, Salesforce.org are also doing an official webinar about communities next week, and I'll remind everybody at the end of the session. But in the meantime, we can get going. So what we thought we'd talk about a little bit, I was quite interested in getting some ideas from the panel about, you know, why you'd use a community and what some good use cases are. But we can also talk a little bit about the practicalities of how you set up a community. And certainly I think that might be a good thing for questions if anyone's been trying to set up a community and has some has run into some issues or just wants to know a little bit more about how to do it. But I wondered if we could start maybe with just let's define a community with an uppercase C, or define a community as Salesforce defines a community. I mean, what essentially, if one of you could just sort of summarize what is a Salesforce community?
Yeah, I can. So Salesforce Community is essentially a limited experience version of your Salesforce instance that comes with specialized tools in which to kind of design and present it to users. Those users can be internal or external. Though the licensing is different depending on if they're internal or external, but the community is essentially a branded kind of separated functionality that gets exposed to external and internal users in a different interface than your internal org.
Hi, this is Kari. I think that was a great description. I think the only thing I would add is just to emphasize that it's, some people think it's like your data is in a different place from Salesforce, but it really is just a window into your Salesforce world that you're opening up at that limited way. So yeah, it's a great description.
And to bring some of the Salesforce lingo into play, it used to be called Portal. So if you've inherited an org that has Portal licenses is fairly similar, and they're transferring all of that stuff into communities. So it's a different way to log in and access your data in a limited format.
And you can use it very specifically for kind of entering particular kinds of information, or giving people limited access to particular objects, can't you? But you can also, I mean, you can allow people can have access to things like Chatter, and they can post a bit like, you know, we do in the Power of Us Hub, and that there's that whole side to communities as well, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I actually think the Salesforce Trailhead communities and that Power of Us Hub are great examples of what communities can do and be. And for someone that's never seen it, but they've been in those, it's like, that's a community. It's just, it can be as broad or as limited as you want to. It can be quite limited and you're just opening access to a very little bit, or it can be pretty broad. That's the fun of the flexibility of it.
So So where do you think the kind of the best use cases are for communities? I mean, if an organization is thinking about it, is it, you know, a community is a great way if you serve a particular type of client, for example, to give your clients access, or are they more, you know, is a community something, some way that you might organize your volunteers, or is it the right answer for your board? I mean, where, and yeah, kind of each of you can speak to this. I mean, where do you think the sort of the sweet spot for having a community lies, or is it all of those things?
D, all of the above.
It can be all of those things.
Yeah.
It can be you want your donors to have access to see what their giving is. It can be you're capturing applications or mini grants, or you have a case management system in place. You've got maybe partners that need access to your org, where you've got partner orgs that need to see their snippets of information and nothing else. There's a lot of use cases for communities. Board members are great as well, because you're not paying. You can give them what they need to see so that they're not overwhelmed by everything. But basically, anytime you have a subset of constituents, whether it's internal or external, that you either need to capture data from or share data with, it can be a great tool. If the licensing and access makes sense, which we can dig into later.
Yeah, and to yeah, exactly, that it's, you know, think about what are the groups of people that you work with and support and engage with? Is there a large group of those people that could benefit? Like the volunteer community can be really robust. They could be able to submit applications to volunteer. They could update their, of course, any community can update their contact information. Volunteers could view their history of volunteering, their hours, sign up for new hours, log time. You can actually give them, give someone a special the Plus license that'll allow them to basically help others get set up, and so that you can delegate, whether it's a lead volunteer could create volunteer events on your behalf. They could recruit volunteers on your behalf. You can really leverage a volunteer community to do a really broad number of things. I think one of the basics that any community does really well is providing access to, you know, FAQs and documents that are, you can put out on the community and give resources, so that there's sort of that self-help community approach.
And it's also great, isn't it? Because actually part of what the community gives you is a framework to then do other more specialist things. I know, Sarah, I mean, you have a lot of experience with your team of really kind of customizing the community. I mean, it basically, it's the kind of framework, isn't it? And then you
Yep.
essentially build sort of custom web pages and things to give people very specialized access.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, the Salesforce community platform is just in a lot of ways, it's just an open programming platform. There's a lot you can do out of the box, drag and drop if you're on, you know, kind of doing it yourself or on a lower budget. But also, if you want to build a full custom web app that you might normally build like full stack or, you know, in some other language, you can definitely build it on Salesforce. So a lot of what my team does is, you know, complete kind of custom web app development on the Salesforce platform through communities. Yeah. And we'll get to see examples of all of our communities today.
Oh, great. All right. So you're all lined up to do that. Okay. Everybody is listening very quietly and calmly. We haven't had any questions yet. Feel free, if you have questions, to post them in the chat as we get going. But as I say, obviously everybody is kind of sitting there quietly waiting to actually see some things. So who would like to go first? And if you've got something to show us. And we didn't decide this in advance. I usually try and I usually warn people, but it's kind of.
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, all right.
I don't care. Or if anyone else wants to, that's fine too.
Go for it.
Go for it.
All right. And how long approximately should we talk for? Like
I
5
think
minutes?
we're doing, yeah, I mean, 5 to 10 minutes, I think is.
Okay.
As I say, I mean, you may, if we don't get lots of questions, then we can let everyone keep talking. But I'm sure as we see some things, people will have more questions.
For some reason, the share button, is that my screen? Is not working. Hold on.
Okay.
Share my screen. Yeah, the share button's grayed out. Do we know why that would be?
I made you the presenter, so. All right, let me shift back to me. Let's try that. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm back to being the presenter, so let me try again. Okay, should be something coming your way.
So weird. It pops up to share your screen, but the share button is disabled.
Ah.
Sarah, go to the list of people and click the little 3 dots next to your name. See if you have a make presenter option.
I just have mute me and edit name and email.
I have the option to make presenter. Do you want me to go first?
Well, why don't we start? Yeah, if you want to take over, TJ, and get started, and we'll see if we can troubleshoot. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes I think the web option isn't always behaving. So
I'll log out and log back in quickly. Great,
thank you for that. And also, if just as you're talking, TJ, and for the others to think about, we have an interesting question from Catherine, which is what sort of what questions, use case questions, do you ask your customers, she says, to determine if communities would be a helpful tool or application for them. She says she feels there's the case where they may not know what they don't know. So how would you kind of probe a little to figure out if a community is a good solution for them? So thank you for the question, Catherine. It's a good thing to bear in mind as we're talking. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, TJ. And yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so you're seeing the login or the register page?
Register page.
Perfect. So we had to create a custom register page for this particular community because we wanted to be able to have the option of English and Spanish, and the built-in with communities Spanish, the language picker was only for guest users and not registered users. So we wanted to be able to have a way to capture at registration that they needed a different language, so we could tag their user as being a Spanish user, so they would see everything in Spanish. So we essentially just cloned it and added the options to make it Spanish, and then unfortunately we did have to bring some code in to get that to work properly. We had some issues, so we had to code that piece. So a lot of it you can do out of the box, but sometimes you do need to bring in coders to make it work just the way you want. So this is a community to capture applications for a grant to be able to purchase a clean vehicle. And it's a little not pretty at this point. This was version 1, and we're in the process of completely reworking this to make it a little bit more user-friendly and make the layout a little bit prettier and make the whole process smoother. But this is kind of a concept that we went with for the first round to find out how things go, and now we're going to rework it. But what this is the home page, and this top here where it says welcome in this box is an embedded flow, and the flow calls other flows so that depending on the language, depending where you are in the application process, you see the right information and are asked the right questions. So up here in the top with the language English, Spanish, this is actually an App Exchange app that we downloaded. So if I click on Spanish, it will flip me over and make everything the Spanish version. So that was a really nice, simple, pre-existing Lightning component that we were able to take advantage of. These 6 little boxes here, we brought in a coder to deal with, because what they wanted it to do was, throughout the application process, as they hit certain milestones, make certain of these available to click, and then once they are done, have a checkbox over it. And one of the things, whenever you're dealing with developers, is to think through what piece of it really needs to be code and what can be done with just declarative and regular Salesforce functionality. So the triggering criteria of when each box is green, which is when it's kind of grayed out, and when it has the checkbox, are all formula fields on this application object. And it's been a good thing, because they've changed when they should appear and when they shouldn't several times throughout this process. So we didn't have to go back to the coder for that. The developer said, okay, here's the fields that you need to update, and we have been updating those to our heart's content, which has made it really easy for us to maintain and upgrade as things have shifted. So coding what you actually need coded that you can't do with other things, is really the way to go, so that it can remain dynamic. So if I click into this application, this also calls a flow. Oh, right, I forgot about that. We have it currently turned off. Let me quickly go back in here and change the status of one of my things to pending. Save that in and reshare. So I just went in and changed one of my existing applications to pending. And so now you can see that all of these options have filled in or opened up to be able to use. And again, these are all flows, because we wanted to have branching criteria. And now that it's done, it has a check mark, so that I can see, oh, here's the things I've done, and what needs to be completed. This is a very simple, they need to be able to capture a lot of complex questions and branching. And if there's time at the end, I can show you a snapshot of the flow itself. The flow is a little insane and calls other flows. I think there's a total of about 12 flows that are feeding this, but they're all flows. So it's all declarative point and click functionality. We are able to upload files, have branching questions, and have multiple language. And then when you log out, it kicks you back to, because it's turned off, it's not doing it, but when you log out, it kicks you back to the main website. So that's one instance of gathering and they had thousands and thousands of applications. So that's an instance where a simple form wouldn't work, because they may start the process, stop. They have 35 days to get to the point where the grant is accepted or denied. So within those 35 days, they can come back in, they can update, they can upload files, they can check on where they are in the process. So that is one of the perfect uses for a community, where you can't really do that with a form, and be able to display information and capture information in such a dynamic and robust way.
That's great, thank you. I mean, going back to Megan P's question, so you said that some of it had to be done with code. I think she's sort of referring, some of those pieces that we were seeing on that page. You said there's a flow behind them, but that display that we see Is that coded, or are they Lightning components? She's wondering how you build some of those things.
I think it was the spring release last year that rolled out flow embedding for communities. So it just happens to be perfect timing for us that there is now kind of similar to Lightning pages, where you can embed flows in Lightning pages. You can now do that in communities. So that piece was completely out of the box. We did have a developer customize a little bit for us, because we wanted to be able, when you hit the end, we wanted the finish to take us back to the home page. And there were some flow tech capabilities that we just needed to have tweaked a little bit to give us some variables to be able to do that. But being able to embed the flows, it's straight out of the box with communities.
That's great, thank you. And Sarah, I'm not sure exactly what you're going to show, but maybe because Megan has a sort of follow-up question, maybe you could talk a little more to the kind of how some of these things are put together if you do some custom code. Are you ready to? You said you'd managed to log back in successfully, so shall I move to you? Yeah. And then Kari, I think as we come back to your part, I'd love to pick up on some of this great stuff you've been writing in chat about kind of making the case, because I think you've made some really good points there. So we will come back to that. There you go. Oh.
Is this thing
funny.
on?
It is. I can see your screen, and I'm thinking, I recognize that one.
I know, I did it for you. Yeah. Sure, absolutely. So I've got two examples of communities to show. And one example is where we used standard Lightning components. So they're custom coded components. They're not like drag and drop out of the box components, but they're components where we used SLDS, which is the kind of the Lightning CSS. And so we basically used all the standard Aura components that come with Salesforce for coding against, and didn't style it at all. It's just, you know, where the client was like, we don't want to pay for a designer. We are fine with this aesthetic that's coming from the community. And then the other one that I'm going to show is a pretty heavily customized experience. So the first one I'm going to show is for a higher ed accreditor. And they basically are a nonprofit that accredits higher education institutions. And we've made for them both an institution portal and a volunteer portal, we call them. So the institution portal are where the institutions come, and obviously this is all test data, is where the institutions come to kind of understand the process of accreditation and what they need to provide, and that sort of thing. So this was, you know, designed by a design team. The homepage, I think, is a little bit strange, but it's kind of more of a placeholder while they worked on more important things. The institution can come in and see their profile and make edits to it. So this is everything about this, you know, test institution. They can list out who their key contacts are, which is important for the accreditation process. They must have somebody in the CEO, CFO, and ALO roles in order to do their accreditation. And you can see that this is laid out a lot differently than kind of a standard Lightning or Salesforce page would be. Locations, this is where each of the locations of the campuses are listed out for this institution. Annual updates are where the institution comes once a year for a 6-week period. This is open and editable, and is not editable right now, but this is like a massive page that's actually going to be redesigned. This is a perfect example of what happens when your client says, I think there's only like 50 fields. And then 250 fields later, you've got this like extremely long page. So this is like a great example of where you have to iterate on design and refactor code and kind of get it out in the field, get it used, understand the problems with it, and then, you know, kind of come back and do a second revision on it. So that is definitely planned for this page. And then one of the more complex things we've done is on the reviews page. And admittedly, I haven't looked at this particular example, so I'm not actually sure what's in it. Let me move this GoToMeeting thing out of the way. Oh, is it still rendering? I think it's still rendering. All right, we'll leave it there for a minute. Oh, my whole thing is frozen.
And GoToMeeting may be in your way, but we don't see it. So
yeah, and my entire screen is frozen.
yeah.
So I'm going to move on to something else. And oh, there we go. It was in the middle of rendering. I think you couldn't see the wheelie thing. Like sometimes things are weird in the meeting. So basically, because this is test data and junky, it's this is not exactly what it would look like, but we've basically done nested. So each accreditation cycle that they have a number of reviews that they have to do depending on what it is that they're trying to get approved. So if you're an institution and all of a sudden you want to add a new degree program, or you want to add a new location, you can't just do that. That needs to go through an accreditation process as well. So each of these review records, you can see here how they're nested because they went through a review to provide a report, and they weren't great, and this test questionable institution was questionable in nature with their review, and so then they had a follow-up review that came out of that, and so you can see here how it renders to show that they're embedded, so that the institution knows, oh, this focus report came out of this monitoring report. So there's a lot of kind of like complexity in this page in how it renders. And if they were done, they would be green. I don't know if we have any completed ones in this. No, these are all open. And then lastly, the last page I'll show you from here is basically the evidence page, which if any of you have been through any kind of accreditation, you're probably familiar with the concept of standards and providing evidence. So this is where the standards are listed, and this is where they kind of drag and drop files in, or they can add from a file library to provide evidence for each of these standards. And then when the criteria is complete, they can mark it as complete. And then when they save the page, the number of outstanding items updates. So this is, and they have to basically provide evidence for all of these things on the left-hand side. So that's just an example. Yeah, go ahead.
Uploading, and when all of this all the data and things that feeds back again into things with Salesforce, and the uploading of files, are you using Salesforce files for that, or is there something?
That is a great question. We are not using Salesforce files for this because Salesforce files have extreme limitations when it comes to doing things with files in bulk or at volume, I should say. So there are really weird rules that you uncover that are documented nowhere. I would know because we've tried to implement this in files and then had to undo it and put it into box.com instead. So Salesforce files has just some really like strange rules like, oh, one person can't own more than 100 folders, and one person can't do this, and this file can't be shared amongst more than one record. And so we just wound up with pretty severe limitations. So we made a custom object to represent files, and we upload directly into Box using the Box API, and then we basically have tie on that custom object record for each file. We maintain the Box ID on it so that it basically links directly from Salesforce into Box.
But this is,
Box is pretty cheap as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an amazing example. This, because as you said, it's your framework. Everything is there in a community, but you know, as you look at it, you wouldn't really notice that it's a Salesforce community. I suppose apart from the URL. I mean, everything is
right.
highly customized, isn't it?
Yes. There is not, I mean, like the nav is actually using like the standard nav component, though it's obviously like colored and styled. And each of the fields like on form pages are actually using the kind of Aura field that comes in Lightning, but it's so highly stylized and it's all code. You wouldn't really build an app of this size and complexity with standard components. You wouldn't be able to have the usability that you would want. But it also, this is a very expensive application to build, so you also have to keep in mind that you have to have a pretty decent budget to be able to build something like this.
On the other hand,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the other hand.
On the other hand, we have a different higher ed accreditor as well that had a very different budget and very different needs. They didn't feel like they needed something that was completely custom designed. They didn't feel like they needed to spend a ton of money, and that they could get something reasonably solid out of the box. So this is also coded, but this is coded using standard Lightning components. So the framework is code, but like the nav is just the standard nav component. This is the standard table component. If we go in to edit something, we have a page that is just a standard form page in Lightning. So again, it's like, even though this was coded, it is a much lower cost application because we didn't work with a designer. We basically used everything that comes kind of out of the box from Lightning and used the code to put it on the various pages. There is certainly logic around everything that made it a little bit too complex to actually be kind of done in the standard drag and drop Lightning builder. And some of the things that we do when we're building these, that if you're going to work with a vendor to build you a custom application, what I would suggest is making sure that everything is in a custom label, or we do two things. We do kind of all of the field labels or custom labels, and then we also do an object that's dedicated to kind of having rich text fields on it for blobs of text that are here, so that the client can configure all of the labels and all of the text on the pages themselves, like this blob, for example. So when they decide, oh, we actually want to say something else, same thing with help text. We use just the standard field help text or help text fields in a custom object, so that whenever they decide, oh, we want to change this question, we want to change this text, we want to change this help text, nobody needs to go in and code anything. The idea is to leave the client as self-sufficient as possible, even though it's a custom coded solution. So that's and then here, for example, you can see where we've embedded a form assembly form in which is slow to render here. And it is a crazy form. It has 18 pages, but here you can see where we basically just embedded a form assembly form, because it was going to be much cheaper to make a form assembly form from an 18-page form, as well as allowing the client to update this as they will, since it's just an administrator who can update this form. You don't need a software engineer for it. So where we could pull out pieces and save them money and make it so that it's even more configurable for them, we did so. Yep. So that was kind of what I was going to show. I mean, I have a million more things I could, but I figure that's probably good time.
No, that's really great. And I think Jesse Rimpf is kind of would love to know a bit more about the limitations of working with files. So if you wouldn't mind having a look in chat. Okay, and she's saying the form assembly licenses for communities seems very robust. I think, it's good, isn't it? Because you can, that form that you were going to, I know it's a little difficult in that particular version of the form, but you can use pre-fill connectors, can't you, and pass IDs over from the community quite easily. I believe,
yes,
for form assembly.
quite easily.
Yeah. Okay, Carolina has probably kind of actually given us a really good segue, Kari, because she's asking about standard communities functionality.
Yes, I saw that.
And I think you were going to show us something which is a little less customized, but is kind of making more use of perhaps more of the things that you would get as you turned on a community or activated a community.
That's correct. Can you see my screen, my welcome screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So the basic, yeah, it's kind of a big question of what's the basic functionality of a community. It's kind of like saying what's the basic functionality of Salesforce. There's so many different things it can do, and I think you just saw some great demos of where you can take it. And so it really does kind of go back to that one question about what are some good questions to start with to really explore, is communities for me and how would you use it? And you know, some of that, let's be real, is financial, right? What do you financially have available? And also, you may have that group of users that doesn't need a bunch of access. They really don't. And so why on earth would you want to give them a full license when one, it might give them way more than they need? Yes, you could lock it out off their profile, but why give it to them if they don't need it in the first place? And you'll save some money by giving them a different kind of license that will give them all that they need, but doesn't give them extra stuff. So I think that's really, you know, we've all three of us have talked about that's the starting place is, do you have a group? And as I said, you can have volunteer community that allows them to do applications and log in. I heard an example of a volunteer diver community for an aquarium where the divers logged in and they could leverage that for, you know, share things with each other. I heard an example of a food bank that had several communities, and one community was where they engaged community partners to help find resources for the people visiting the food bank, like jobs and job support, interview support, as well as their own users that would come into the food bank and how they would get what they need and be able to sort of log in and get their support. The boards are such a great example of engaging your board, whether it's just like tracking board meetings and information or others. I also supported a project where it was a youth orchestra, and the students eventually will have access. The parents eventually will be a big part of the parent community. But the first phase was giving teachers access, all the teachers that would come into this after school program, and they could log attendance for the students. And it was a much more affordable model. So there was a team that had the full platform license, but those teachers could log into that community. They could see who their students were. They could see their schedules. They could see what instruments the students played and so on. And with that model, that's really all they needed. They didn't need complex reporting. They really just needed to track attendance to know where they should be and who their students were. So that was a great example of the use case of the community. And so there's, you know, what it can do. I think hopefully in that mix, you've heard some of those core features about the chatter option. Like you can track, you know, my feed, who's you can, remember, you can, just like you can internally, you can chatter on a specific record. You can chatter in a group. You can go to someone's profile. Another example is a university that has, it's basically a think tank of really savvy people, super experienced now, you know, people that have been places in their careers, all come together in this sort of think tank. And the community is the place for them to connect with each other. Like if they have a question of a specific topic, they can search for other members in that think tank community who have that particular expertise that they're looking for. Not so much to hire them, but to brainstorm how could they do this, address this issue in the circumstances they're in. So it gives them a great collaboration environment, you know, that's really far beyond what Salesforce is doing. So that connectivity with each other, you don't have to have that. You can have some of the communities I've worked on really didn't want a lot of chatter functionality except from the community user to an internal user. So that can be a great thing where the community user can post on the chatter record feed, yeah, I have a question about this one thing, and the internal user can respond back. Obviously, you can use cases for some of that as well. That's a great function of the community too, is using cases to track sort of that help, how to get them some help quickly. Even if you're not doing live agent, you can still have that. So if you think about this, how do your different groups need to interact with you internally? How is that happening now, and what could be simplified and basically, you know, taken out of a much more manual process into a more automated process or into a more fluid process? for the youth orchestra example, they were tracking things across several sites on paper, in Google Sheets, in a lot of random different documents, and putting it into Salesforce allowed them to bring it into one place, and then bringing it in the community allowed the teachers to make sure there wasn't a duplicate effort of tracking attendance to make that just more efficient. So there's a lot more I could say on the different features. Feel free, Caroline, to ask me any questions. I don't see chatter in the view I have right now, so just go ahead and interrupt me if there's more follow-up question on that. I wanted to show you a little bit of this. This is just a dev work. Obviously, this is not fancy. This is not branded. This is just absolute basic. What I wanted to do was hit on a few things. I want to talk about security, and then I want to show you a page variation, just one of my favorite little tips that a lot of my colleagues have found super helpful. The first is security. Keep in mind that just because you take the profile, you take it off a page layout. So in the community, you have page layouts, you have other ways to access data. Just because it's not on the page layout doesn't mean that I can't accidentally search for something. And so security is something that you need to have someone that really understands the nuances of sharing rules, of access, all the different ways data can be accessed, because it's very easily to accidentally open up data. Now, it can be all controlled. The structure's there 100%. You don't need to worry about trusting a Salesforce community. It's about setting it up adequately. Remember, if you don't want them to see it, take it off their profile. Do the other things you need. Think about org-wide defaults. I've seen where some clients start out with an org-wide default of public read on an object like contacts. Well, maybe you don't have a contact page. Like right now, what you're looking at here, there's really no way to get to a list of contacts, but I could eventually get there, or I could search if contact is visible on my profile and it's org-wide read write even. Now I can go edit someone else's contact record or even my own. So be very aware, be really thorough when you're thinking org-wide defaults in the sharing settings, when you're thinking about what's on the profile, what objects can they see, what fields that can they see. Really be thorough in walking through all those pieces. I think that'll make a big difference in both making sure your community functions the way you need it to, but also that it's secure.
That actually goes to Megan's question that she asked about having multiple communities versus a community with different use cases, where if you're trying to use one community for different use cases, you can come across this security and visibility issue. So you really want to make sure if you're using a community, everyone who's accessing that community is going to be there for at least some sort of the same purpose. If it's one group needs to access cases and another group just needs to maybe update their single contacts, or you have another that needs to create an application, or you want board members in, you might want to split those so that you're not having a visibility nightmare of unintended data being visible to those that don't necessarily need it, because you could technically have different profiles, but then you're having to think through everything. Sorry. Go ahead, Kari.
Yeah, great. Thanks for jumping in there. That's a great point. What I want to show you next, a little demo on page variations. And so I think, again, thinking through when is it time for a different community versus when can I customize my community to have them see what they want to see. Page variations is one example of not quite to the use case of needing a whole different community, but I may want to give a different view. That's about audiences, and I'm not actually going to go into audiences. What I want to do is this one simple tip that if you notice, this is the standard record detail page down here with the highlight banner up here. And it's got all these buttons. I like the banner piece, but I don't always like the buttons, and I don't always want chatter. And record detail, this is one single component. How do I get rid of that because record detail has that? Well, you can do that. Of course, you can do a lot of things once you dig into them, but let's go into Builder and I'll show you a quick and simple tip. And keep in mind that the builder in the community is really built on the Lightning page builder model. So if you think about building a Lightning page internally and how you navigate, how you do components, I think those of you that aren't sure how to do builder in a community, that'll help you kind of get comfortable with how these different pieces work, how you do page layouts. So this is a standard case detail page. So when you go up to the very top, you have all the pages that are existing. You can create a new page, which one option is you select an object like contacts, and it'll automatically generate a detail, a list view, and I forget off the top of my head my third option, but it'll create those automatically. So you have, where we're at is the case detail, which is the standard one for this. I didn't want the standard one. I don't want to delete it. I don't want to change it. What I want to do is have a variation. And so you would go to case detail. Oops. Oh, sorry, not at all what I meant to do. Let's go to case detail. There's the case. So you see case detail, case list, and case related list. Those come along when you add a new object. Click on the three dots. On the properties, I can choose to change, well, 1, 2, 3 columns, whatever I want to do with the columns, I can change that there. Click on this tab, and now I can do variations. And I had clicked on new variation and created this one right here. So let me show you this one. So now we're going to look at a page variation of case detail. And so in this case, to Sarah's point, customize the label here. So basically I took off the header. I didn't want those buttons. I like the highlight banner, but I didn't want all those buttons. And notice that we no longer have the chatter. We no longer have all that other busyness. I really just have a simple label, which certainly could make that way more interesting than the way it's written there. But I just want to show you a quick example. This was, I went to components and I grabbed rich content editor and added it to this section. And then I clicked on edit, and then I changed the font. I could change the color. You could do all kinds of things because it's the rich text. And on this one, the record detail, what I did is of course now it's not showing up, but I added it to a new page. When you edit it somewhere else, you see more options. But when you go to a custom page that you created yourself, the simple record detail does this. And that's what I wanted for this example, because sometimes you want all the related lists, you want the chatter. Sometimes you just want to draw the attention of that community user to just the details and the details only. I could still come over here and grab, all kinds of, I could grab, it's way at the bottom. I could grab a single related list, which I love doing when I want to highlight one single related list. I could grab, I could put a banner in there. It's a number of things you can do, but that gives you a way to really give a very clean, lean look. So that, just a very quick tip for you, and that was really all I intended. I'm happy to show something else if you like. Like I said, this is just a dev org to play around in. There is a ton you can do out of the box. This is the customer service template. Where the code does, it takes you to the next level. When you really need some extra customization, you really need it to look very particularly a certain way. But there is a lot of flexibility within themes, colors, backgrounds, using a photo background, that kind of thing.
That's
So
great.
any particular questions?
That's great. Jay is saying, thank you very much. That's a great example of the page variations. No, I think you're right, isn't it? As people, if you play around and get more used to a lightning page builder, then this will all seem familiar and you'll understand some of the options. And I think it's a great idea to be able to customize like that. And thank you for the tip about the security and the permissions. That's a good one as well. Let's I think unless we have any specific, no, we've had some general questions, and Megan, we may come back to talking about multiple communities in a little bit. Before we run out of time, let's just have a quick chat about licensing and kind of what you need to set up with a community. I know we mentioned it very briefly at the beginning. TJ, do you want to talk a little bit to license and license types?
Yes. So one of the biggest reasons orgs don't go licensing is cost. So when you're considering, oh, do I just go a form builder or a form builder with maybe pre-population because you want to pull some information from the system and be able to have them update it or just review it versus a full community. What we didn't see here, because of the confidentiality piece around it, I have one client that has case management around legal requests that come in, that they have volunteer lawyers log in and communicate with the folks that are asking questions, that you need to have full access of that data. but sometimes you might be able to use a form builder and like pre-population. So there's two different types. Well, there's different levels of licensing. You've got the customer, customer plus, partner, employee, and each has different. If you need access to opportunities, you need the partner. Some, I believe, like if a report. So there's different levels of licensing, but for each level, there's a membership license versus a login license. And this is where pricing really comes into play. So for instance, the case management where those volunteer lawyers are logging in, that client has a membership license because they have only maybe 10 lawyers active at a time. But the application website has a login-based license because they've got thousands of applications being entered. So a membership license, think of your standard software license or your basic Salesforce license. One license for that user. It's tied to that user. A login license is priced on how many logins per month. It's an average of your monthly logins over the course of the year. So if one person logs in one time a month, you get charged for one. If one user logs in 10 times, you get charged for 10. So if you have high volume, you want to make sure you go login because obviously the login is cheaper per login, and you're not going to want to pay for a dedicated license for large volume. So you really want to think through who needs access, how do they need access, do they need to be able to self-register? So that registration page that I showed in the beginning is allowing users to self-register versus with the volunteer lawyers, we're setting those up behind the scenes because they're membership licenses. We don't want them self-registering. We want to make sure that we know who's accessing the system. So depending on your usage, communities can get expensive.
Which way do you normally recommend, Sarah, with the licenses? Because as TJ said, there are kind of two variations on customer, customer and customer plus. Do you have a recommendation as which way you need to go? I mean, what does plus give you?
Right. Well, plus gives you access to content and reporting that you don't have otherwise. And plus also has a slightly different sharing model that it allows for. Almost all of our clients are on regular. Oftentimes Salesforce might recommend plus, and I think it's just, there is a sheet that has like that will show you side by side the differences. And because plus is a good deal more money than the regular one, I think it, whenever you're evaluating that type of thing, it makes sense to just look at the side-by-side comparison and see if plus has things that you absolutely need. If you're not going to expose reporting, which is frankly pretty hard to expose in a community because the interface is really like the big reports interface. And a lot of times, somebody is going to do something in your community that's going to trigger a change onto another object, right? You might have a process builder, you might have a workflow. And so if you're there doing something in your contact record and it needs to go update an education record, you need access to that record, but you can't just take it out of their profile. But then when you look at the reporting interface, there's, that object is going to be there and they're going to have access to things you don't want them to have access to. So, and especially around tasks and activities, there's just a number of things that kind of show up where you're like, oh, I wouldn't actually want them to report on that. So I think it's pretty uncommon to actually expose the full reporting interface in the community. And then content is the other big one, that Salesforce content that comes with plus.
Great, thank you. And there was a quick question. Has anyone done a migration from having this idea of per member user a community license to going to the monthly login? And if you can you migrate from one to the other? Is there any disruption? Anybody done it?
I've done that. You can migrate from from the seat base to the login base you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because the login base technically, even though it's login based, it's giving each person a license anyway. But it's like it kind of gives you like, 2 million licenses, or it like gives you a ton of licenses so that, it counts how many times they log in, but it's still provisioning a license, so you can go between the two license types and change without disruption to the user. We have done that.
And
I just wanted to add one more
Go on,
thing
please do
about
that.
licenses, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
It's just a reminder that you can have a mix, right? You can have a couple leads that have the plus license, and then the rest of them that have the basic license, and the leads do some things or provide information to the rest. So you mix and match, some have logins, some don't. What are the needs of your users, and give them, you can all in the same community.
And partner as well. Yeah, they can all
Yes.
exist in the same community and platform, because the one thing to note that is that for internal users that are going to be using a community, if all they're going to be using is your community, like for some reason they're staff, but you don't need them to use internal Salesforce, you really just need them to use the community too. They can use a platform license for that, or what's now called like app builder or app starter. I think app starter it's called now, but it's what was the platform license. It's about a third of the cost of the regular license. You cannot use community licenses for internal staff users. They're not going to prevent you from doing it. Your instance won't blow up, but if they find out, they can fine you because it is against the rules. So, and we have clients who do it. I'm just throwing it out there that like that is definitely not something you're supposed to do.
Thank you for
And
that.
any standard Salesforce license can access any community if you
Correct.
Let their profile access it. So you don't need to get additional licenses for internal folks to access the community.
Exactly.
Yes, because indeed that's what you've all been doing, isn't it? Is using a standard Salesforce license and just logging in as a community user in your demos, which is great. Thank you. So we're a little over the hour, so thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Yes, there you are. Thank you for giving a bit of detail, Jessie. There is from salesforce.org. Jessie is running a customer success webinar on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, also about communities. So if you want to know more, please go and join that. But otherwise, thank you for the wonderful information shared and for the great questions. And this has been a really interesting conversation. I have been recording it. It's going to take. I'm still having problems converting GoToMeeting recordings, so I can't promise that it'll be posted immediately, but I'll do my best on that. Anyway, thank you again. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for the good questions. Office Hours will be back with a general Q&A session next Friday. So see everybody then. And in the meantime, thank you again and have a lovely weekend.